So with what you're doing and have done in the last decade with new schools of Baton Rouge, how has that kind of shifted in what your current role is with the Baton Rouge Area Foundation?
Yeah, no, I see your koozie here.
Absolutely. It's a great looking koozie, you know?
Yeah, well, we traded. I mean, again, I did not see, I was fired up about the mission I was working on. And, really during COVID, even though we were making such good progress, when we came back after that of having that kind of lost time, we, like everywhere in the country, you could see it in the data, all of our students took a step back, right? And so, again, education is just one part of kind of the puzzle here in creating a city that really could be the best version of itself. And so, I just really, it gets back to this, like, if we're just working on that, there's so many other things. And I saw this when I was teaching that can impact a kid's life, their home environment, right? Whether there's abuse or there's struggles at home financially, the safety in their neighborhoods, what comes on the other side, right? So, okay, cool. So I've left, I got my diploma. I did all the things I was supposed to do. Maybe I wasn't as prepared. What's my next opportunity to get a high-paying, well-paying job? And so, that sort of experience of seeing that, families aren't in pieces and parts. There's this more holistic opportunity kind of timed up with, we had a transition of the Baton Rouge Area Foundation, and they were looking for a new CEO after 30 plus years. And so I really felt like I had a front row seat to the foundation because it was such a huge propeller for me and New Schools for Baton Rouge and the entire effort to create better educational options in this community, that I was like, this is a platform and a vehicle that, if I was thinking about this for 10 years, just the education piece, how does it translate to the other issues in our community that really define whether we're creating more opportunities or not? And so was really, privileged to be selected as the CEO. Started about a year and a half ago. And, step into this nearly 60-year-old incredible organization that just had really kind of come from a dozen civic leaders that got together and said, you know what, instead of sort of giving on our own and trying to affect change our own, we got to come together, kind of pool our resources and give for a bigger and higher order change. So, by ourselves, we can get this much done, but together, our pie can be much bigger. And so stepping into kind of that organization and thinking about, all the sort of opportunities and challenges in front of Baton Rouge, couldn't pass up the chance to throw my name in the hat. And again, just really grateful to be there.
Yeah. And now you're working on different initiatives throughout the year. You've got a lot of similar but different interests within the organization between New Schools of Baton Rouge and BRAF. So what are some kind of key initiatives y'all are focusing on at this time?
Yeah. So I really think about, again, what are we leaving to our children? When I arrived at BRAF, we do an annual survey called City Stats. So we measure basically, how do people feel about the direction of Baton Rouge? What are people worried about? What are they hopeful about? And how does that kind of mesh with what the data actually show? How are we doing as a people? And there was one question we'd asked right before I arrived. And so I get these results. And the question was basically, is this a city that when your kids grow up, you would encourage them to come back to and make a life? Like, is this a place that you'd say, when they ask you advice, should I move and take this job in Dallas, after college or whatever? Or should I, go to California or Florida or Texas? Or should I stay here in Baton Rouge and find a job here? What are you going to say to your son or daughter? And for the first time since we'd been taking the poll, a majority of parents said they would tell their kids to leave. A majority said they would tell
So we're not
their
talking
kids,
10 or 20%. We're talking a majority.
A majority
Wow.
said we would tell our kids to leave, to be one of those cars, packing up and leaving. And probably worse, the parent or the grandparents probably saying, you know what, I'm going where they're going because that's where my grandkids are and I want to be closer to them. So if we think that about ourselves, right? And you start asking the question, why is it that you would tell your kid, don't come back here? And again, I'm not talking about where you go to college. I'm talking about they're sort of adults and they're weighing like, mom, dad, like, man, I'm just struggling. I feel maybe this urge and calling to come back home. Should I? And you're like, no, don't do it. I think that's the fundamental question for all of us. This needs to be a community where that question isn't even asked.
Right.
It's so obvious that the place that you can do the most for your family, that you can propel then your own kids to have a better life, is to raise them here. That ought to just be a matter of fact. And so for me, it really just cemented like what does the Baton Rouge Area Foundation exist for? Its whole purpose was originally these dozen folks said, if we band together, we can help tackle our biggest challenges because we're working together, because we're pooling our philanthropic resources. We're giving not just for the sake of giving, we're giving to affect change. There's some strategy. There's some idea of like, I'm putting money behind this because it's going to lead to a different outcome. And that whole idea, I think you can see it over our 60 years has played out in various ways. But I really saw this chance to kind of crystallize it around what we're calling the opportunity agenda, which is what are those measures about whether you have more opportunity or less? What are those things in life that if you have access to this, or if you have access to that, your chances of living a better life than your parents did, your chances of having more doors open to you are greater than not. And so we really sort of cemented around these kind of 6 pillars that reflect opportunity, and they're not rocket science. We're talking about, whether you grow up in healthy families, safe neighborhoods, quality, education, like these are very basic things. But I think where the strategy gets really interesting is, what we're doing at BRAF is really measuring, well, how are we doing today? So again, let's be truth tellers. And it's not to blame, it's not to criticize. It really is to just say like, all right, let's be honest with ourselves. Where are we not affording more opportunity to our citizens than maybe we should be? Okay, so now we've been honest. Well, then what can we do about it? Well, the great thing about our country is you've got, just like we did in education, you've got hundreds of examples around this country where somebody has been working on helping people get more home ownership than being tenants or bounce around, or working on early childhood education, or working to cut the murder rate in half, right? You can go see other places that have tried things, and we can then learn from that and adapt it to Baton Rouge. And so what I want BRAF to really do from a civic leadership and impact perspective is be a source that, we're going to have the sort of analysis on where we are and some thoughts on where we could go, and really offer that to community leaders, to nonprofits, to politicians, government leaders, of like, these are the issues we ought to be focused on. Because if we work on these for a decade, like we've been doing on K through 12 education options, imagine the incremental change we're going to be making, that when you look back over a decade, you're like, wow, we went from no kids having sort of options to like tens of thousands of families being able to pick any school they want and not have to worry about how it's doing academically.
Yeah.
Well, what if we do that on housing? What if we do that in early childhood? What if we do that in safety, right? And so that's really what kind of has crystallized for me this agenda, because I think if we work on those things, you create a city where there is more opportunity, where it's much more obvious, where nobody even has to ask the question, will our kids come back here? Come on, Siri, you got to get that one.
You got to get that one, Siri. You got to get that one dialed in.
It's got to be obvious.
Yeah, it's 100%. It has to be the majority, if not unanimous. I would have my kids come live here. I would encourage them to stay here. I would encourage them to raise their kids here because of how great the community is. And so within your, initial stint here as the Baton Rouge Area Foundation CEO, you've kind of started seeing that. You have experience. You're coming in, all systems a go, and you're doing what you can to make that happen. I'm really excited to see what you are able to do with the organization and where the foundation is able to take things.